Oh yeah, I heard Sarah mention that I've been at UK for 2 years. That's not totally accurate. It's been a year and 4 months. Um, I was at Mississippi State as a professor down there for about 8 years before coming here, but did my undergrad and master's at UK. So this is kind of sort of like coming home to me. So I'm pretty excited to be here back in the bluegrass. I certainly like the summer temperatures here much better than in the south. I also heard her mention that I'm kind of a sustainable kind of agriculture guy, which is true, but I'm not a tree hugger. I certainly, for home lawns, want to see people using less inputs, but I'm not on the creepy weird side of that. Tonight, this presentation that I'm giving, I usually do it in 3 hours, and we've only got 2 hours tonight, so I'm going to be booking it through. And so if you have questions related to what we're talking about, by all means, stop and we'll talk about it. If you have questions related to your own yard, let's wait to the end and see if there's time to deal with it, and maybe I'll cover it as we go along. I've also got a hockey game this evening. I'm originally from Canada, so I can't get hockey out of my system. And so as soon as 8 o'clock gets here, I need to get rolling. So we need to move. I'll stop rambling and we'll get going. All right, maybe if the computer will work with me. Maybe not. There we go. All right, some real basic stuff here to start with before we get into any specifics whatsoever. This guy to me represents a whole bunch of homeowners. They're just, as a matter of fact, this kind of looks like my backyard right now, but it's just people do a lot of work and it ends up they lose. And hopefully we'll cover a lot of the things tonight that will make it a little bit easier to deal with some of these things. All right, some trivia for you if you're a trivia kind of person. If you're ever on Jeopardy, maybe this stuff will come up. But whole bunch of different grass species out there, whole bunch, 7,500 plus. And people don't really think about it, but things like corn and wheat are grasses. We just obviously don't grow them in yards. We've got 1,400 approximately grasses in the United States, but really only 25 that we can use and cut short like turf grasses. And on top of that, really only 14 that we really ever use because they have good turf quality aspects. And we'll talk about turf quality here in a second. All right, so this is a big deal. Turf across the country is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Huge deal. Much bigger than all the other ornamental horticulture crops. Sorry to Sarah and other folks that deal with other crops, but it's a huge deal. We don't really think about it that much, but looking across the spectrum of where the grass is, you can see there lawns, about half the grass across the country is in lawns. Commercial, things like warehouses and apartment complexes, things like that, about 23%. Roadsides, we don't really think about roadsides being managed turf, but it's just low management. They're low maintenance turf. And then finally, golf courses, pretty low percentage there, 2.8%. Golf courses get most of the flack for pollution, even though they're probably the people that are doing the least amount of polluting when it comes to dealing with turf grass. You can see on the right there about 46.5 million acres of managed turf in the United States. So it's a big deal. All right, I mentioned turf quality, and this is what turf managers, whether we're talking about golf course people, sports turf people, lawn care operators, whoever, even if you're dealing with your own yard, turf quality is the thing that we're striving for. We want good-looking turf. And so all turf quality means is, what are we doing with it? What is it? Is there a specific sport that's being played on it? Is it just for aesthetics? Who knows? So here's a question for the class. Like I said, I can see half of you there. But of those two images, which is the better looking turf? Left or right? Okay, I heard some people say right. Why right? Say that again, one at a time, though.
Uniformity.
Okay, so it looks uniform for sure. What about color? All right, so the color on the right there is darker green, correct?
Absolutely.
All right, so in the United States, we like to see dark green grass. In Europe, they like to see light green grass. But so it's just a kind of an aspect thing. But we want to see the dark green. And so obviously the big dead area on the left image kind of takes away from the quality. And so we wouldn't want to see that. But unfortunately, we see that a lot of times in lawns. And we'll talk about why maybe quality suffers sometimes. So turf quality. Somebody mentioned uniformity, and certainly that grass on the left was not as uniform as the one on the right. And here's what we're talking about with turf quality. So density, the more dense it is, the better. We want a thick grass. And we'll talk later about why that's really important in terms of pest control. Uniform is just one kind of grass, ideally, not a whole lot of weeds. That's what we want to see. Texture, we like to see finer texture versus coarser texture. You've all seen those big, ugly tall fescue clumps in a lawn. That's the kind of stuff we don't want to see in terms of texture. And then color, that's very extreme down there. That's pretty much a dead lawn, but we want to see that much darker green lawn versus the lighter green. So those are the four aspects of turf grass quality. If you're at all curious about which grasses we recommend, which grasses do well in Kentucky, you can go to this webpage. The address is listed down there at the bottom, www.ntep.org. And you can click on whatever kind of grass you're interested in, whether it's Kentucky bluegrass or tall fescue or perennial rye or whatever. And you can click on Kentucky data and find out which grass does the best, which cultivar does the best in our state. And so as you can see there, we rate these on a 1 to 9 scale, where 9 is the best turf quality, 1 is the worst, 1 is basically dead. But this is something that is very helpful for me, and this is something that I've always given my students over the years to look at, because it's certainly a helpful web page, and we get all our recommendations from this testing. All right, so poor turf quality. The first one up there, the unadapted species or cultivar, that's one in Kentucky especially that is a really big deal. What's the nickname for this state?
Bluegrass state.
Bluegrass state. All right. So with that known, you'd probably think that Kentucky bluegrass is a good choice for the state of Kentucky. But it's really an unadapted species. It doesn't do well in Kentucky. And so in the summertime, we could have grass that looks like we see on the right there, full of disease, heat stressed, because it's an unadapted species. And so choosing the right grass to begin with is a really good way to start. Improper establishment, just cutting corners, not making sure the soil's in good shape, not fertilizing, things like that, can lead to poor turf quality. Mismanagement, certainly, misapplying chemicals and fertilizers, not watering, not mowing properly, things like that. Cultivation, which is basically aerification, dealing with hard soils. Most home lawns, we don't really worry about hard soils because there's just not enough traffic on them, but certainly you think about kids' soccer fields and stuff like that, and they run into hard situations. Too much traffic, that'll just wear the grass out. And you think about a soccer goal mouth where the little kids are running back and forth, just standing there basically in the goal crease, and there's no grass, and it just gets worn down where it can't recover. And then the last one there, mistakes in pesticides and different things, just spills or not doing your math correctly can lead to, obviously, poor quality issues. All right. Maintenance levels. We're going to be basically talking mostly about the medium level down there, lawns and parks. You can go with golf greens where stuff is being done every day of the year, basically, to keep these things looking like they do. Tees, fairways, athletic fields where probably 5 days a week there's something being done to them. And then lawns or parks maybe once a week. Versus roadsides where maybe it's once a month that something's happening. All right, going to go through a few benefits of turf here. Again, this is something more for trivia, but it's some of these things you wouldn't really think about, but once you see them, it maybe will jump out at you and it'll make some sense. Some of these pictures don't necessarily tell the story, so I'm going to ask you, what is the benefit of turf here? And it may not be immediately obvious.
Control.
Say again?
Erosion control.
Erosion control, absolutely. If you look at can you all see my pointer?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. You see the ruts cut across the lawn here where there's no grass? So, oops, soil is being removed there because there's nothing to hold the soil in place. But we have thousands and thousands of little grass plants here that hold the soil in place because of all the fibrous, good root system. That's what's doing it. On the right-hand side here, what we've got is, you can see 3 distinct strips across this pretty big slope. And all that's happening there is we've got the same kind of grass, the same variety of grass that somebody didn't want to spend a whole bunch of money across that hill to sod the whole thing. And so they just did 3 strips of sod and then seeded in between to try and save a little bit of money. Certainly you'll get some washing and some runoff between the strips, but hopefully that'll stop at that sod and we won't get it running down into the gutter down there and having soil moving away. You can see there's water down there, but no soil, so obviously it's working. But certainly erosion control is the first benefit there. What about this one? This one might be a little tougher. The guy on the right is what?
Keep the dust down.
It keeps dust down. So all the dust that's flying through the air, all the little particles, because there's, if y'all can see my fingers, all these little grass leaf blades that are standing up, the air blows across and the dust hits it and it traps it and just falls down into the soil, becomes soil again. But grass is really good at cleaning dust out of the air. So those of you that have allergies, grass is a good thing for you for the most part. What about this one?
Air pollution.
What about
Pollution?
Now, think about these folks that are over here on the other side of this berm. Why would you want this big berm in there in a city like this?
Sound barrier.
Exactly, sound barrier. So it's really good at deadening sounds. Sometimes in cities you'll see big concrete barriers, and when you have that, sound just bounces around. They have new porous materials now that do much better, but back in the day they put these big grass barriers up because it would deaden the sound, and the folks living on the other side of the freeway wouldn't have to deal with that. This one's probably not real obvious, but why do we put big parks into major cities? What's this kid doing in the sprinkler there?
Cool.
Yeah, exactly right. He's cooling himself down, and that's exactly what parks do for us. They cool these big concrete jungles. And so cooling the air. It's not just grass, it's all plants that do that, but they're really, really good at cooling the air. What about cities like LA? Ooh. Cities like LA, why would we want grasses there? It cleans pollution out of the air. So very beneficial for major cities that have smog problems, pollution problems. And then this one, how would this game be if the grass, if we weren't able to mow it and it was 4 feet high? Maybe UK would look better. But, you know, I'm sorry to UK fans out there. But if we weren't able to cut grass as short as we can, we would lose the benefit of sports like we know them today. And so the game would really slow down.
Might make it more interesting.
You know, in some situations it would, but if you've ever taken a golf ball and a putter and tried to putt on your home lawn, you know that it just doesn't work very well. And so you can kind of think about that with being able to mow grasses at different heights. So just having the ability to form a thick sod for athletics is our benefit here. And then finally, why would we do something like this? Beautiful area, grass and landscape plants in our yards and around churches and things like that.
Aesthetics.
For sure, aesthetics. No doubt about it. It's a big deal. There's a study done several years ago that having a good-looking yard can increase the value of your home by 10%. That's a huge deal, huge deal. And so putting the effort in, especially when it comes time to sell a property, is very smart to do. All right, a couple of turf terms for you here. Pretty basic, but you'll hear the words turf grass and you'll hear turf. And so based on these two images, you should be able to figure them out. But turf grass, we're just talking about an individual plant. So if I talk about turf grass, I'm talking about one plant. If I talk about turf, I'm talking about a community of plants as well as the soil that they're growing in. So turf would be that whole field. Turf grass would be one plant I plucked out of that field. All right, let's talk specifics about the grass plant. I'm going to get into a little bit of ID stuff here, really basic stuff. I have the scope, but unfortunately it's not working, so we'll just do the best we can with trying to figure out some of this grass ID. All right, so there's different theories of obviously how we got to where we are today. I don't care what your theory is. I'm sure you could care less what mine is, but there's the one issue, the one version that the Bible, that God said that there was grass and there was grass, and then the other version where grass evolved from monkeys. I don't know, but whatever. Regardless of how things happened up until this point, we have grass as it is now, like we know it. And so this is one of the theories that turfgrass scientists have come up with, and I don't know if it's true or not. I wasn't there 2,000 years ago to witness it, so this is what people think. So what does a cow do, or any grazing animal do?
Eats grass.
They eat grass, and certainly they eat other things as well, but they'll choose grass over some other things sometimes. All right, so if that cow eats the top of those flowers off, what happens to those flowers?
They're gone.
Okay. They're not going to come back, are they?
No.
All right. But is the grass going to come back once it's been eaten?
Yes.
All right, so what does that tell you about how the difference between grass and other plants is? How do they grow, the differences? Where would you think the growth point is on a flower versus on the grass?
The flower has to do with the reproduction of the plant, and grass reproduces differently.
Okay, so let's say, well, grass actually has flowers as well. They're just not showy. But let's say that the actual flower itself is not there, and it's just the vegetative part of the plant before it starts flowering. And if the cow comes and eats that top part of that flowering plant off, this is where the growth point is, right here at the top. And so if that gets removed, that plant is done. It's not going to be growing up anymore. But as we said, if the grass gets eaten from this point up, not a big deal. It's going to regenerate. And so that tells me that there's a difference here. The growth point on the grass plant is different than on the other flowering plants. And so when it comes down to mowing or animals grazing, it really is just not a big deal. The cow will come in and graze, or the horse will graze, and they're going to be fine. They'll be wounded a little bit, but they'll recover. And it's all because of this. That growth point on the grass is at the base of the plant versus the other plants at the top. The theory is with the evolution of grasses is that they probably had the growth at the top as well at some point, and then there was some kind of a mutation that caused the growth at the bottom, and yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I wasn't there, but that's what people kind of think. But anyway, so I digress. Here's a crown. This is the base of a plant. You can see the roots coming off, and right at the top here, this is the new shoots that are going to be coming off. We have things like new leaves and new stolons and rhizomes that will come off of this crown as well. And so when a seedling germinates, puts up a new shoot, starts to put down roots, right at that interface is this thing called the crown. And so this crown is a pretty important part of the plant. We'll talk about why here. This is just a really blown up cross section of what the inside of a turfgrass plant looks like. You can see as we get farther out here, individual leaf cells. Each one of these is just going to photosynthesize, make sugar, do its thing. But if you look at this area right here, you can't see specific cells. This is the crown area that these cells have not been delegated to what they're going to be doing yet. And so once the plant decides what it needs, these cells will go into whether it's going to be a flowering structure or a new leaf or what have you. All right, so here's why the crown is so important. We're going to get new roots, we're going to get new leaves, we'll get inflorescence, which is the starting of the flower, and then the seed head forming from the crown. We'll get new buds off the side that will cause tillering and spreading. We'll have storage of sugars that are produced in photosynthesis, and then we'll have lateral stems like stolons and rhizomes coming off of this crown as well. There's also a whole bunch of hormones that are produced in the crown, and the hormones totally control whether the grass grows up tall, whether it grows side to side, whether there's more roots going out, what's going on. It's like its brains. So it's really important because of all these very important things that the crown is protected. What's that mower doing in that image?
Looks like it's
Scalping.
Scalping, exactly right. You all have the terminology down. It's scalping, and so with scalping, all that is taking off way too much leaf material at one time. And so when we're doing that, and you can actually see soil in some parts of this image, if we're getting that far down with the mower, we could be affecting the crown. And if we're affecting the crown, remember that's where the growth point is. We could be killing the plant if we hack into the crown. So it's really important we pay attention. We're not scalping. We're protecting that crown. All right, I mentioned tiller, and all tiller is just a new plant that will come up beside the initial plant. And so on this real picture of this grass up here in the top, we've got maybe this is the original one, and then this is a new tiller that's coming up off the side. Grasses like tall fescue, this is how they spread. It's a really slow way to spread, and you'll see tall fescue clumping sometimes because of this, but they will eventually fill in, and it's better than no spreading whatsoever. It certainly will increase turf density. So that's tillering, new shoots produced from the crown. All right, a whole bunch of terms on this figure. We're going to go through some of these things. Identifying grasses is not easy at all. And if you want to be a grass expert, you really kind of need to know what you're walking on. And so we'll cover a couple of the basics here, the most often seen grasses. So when you walk out into a yard or you're talking to homeowners, you'll have an idea of the differences between Kentucky bluegrass and tall fescue. But we need to look at different things like you see on this image to be able to tell the difference between these grasses. All right. So the first thing here is a ligule. I've got a grass plant in a pot in my window because I'm that much of a dork. But can you all see this plant all right?
Yep.
Okay. So all I'm going to do is pull one of the plants up out of here. And
Oh, there we go. All right.
y'all see it?
Yep.
Okay. So with ligule, all we're doing, I've got the shoot down in my hand here. I've got coming up the top here a fairly new leaf, another fairly new leaf, and an older leaf off the side here. And so all you do to look at a ligule is take that mature leaf and fold it back. And so the images that you see on the screen, that's what I'm doing, is folding those leaf blades back to see if there's a ligule. And so that ligule is the first thing that I always look at to tell what kind of grass am I dealing with. You can't see a whole lot here. I can see can you see a little bit of hair sticking up there? Or is it clear enough?
Yeah.
I don't know if the light might help a little bit. But there's little different characteristics that each grasses have that help us to figure out what's what. So looking at these images, you can see our options for ligule. The one on the top left here is hairy. The top right is membranous, just looks like a piece of skin. Or the one at the bottom there is nothing, it's absent. And so those are our options for ligule. So we're just going to bend that mature leaf back. We're going to look to see what's right at that bend where the blade comes in contact with the sheath. I'll show you that here in a second. to see if there's anything growing there. Another thing is the collar region or auricles. That would be, let me get this dead piece off of here, right behind this leaf area, or the auricles would be right on the front. So the auricles, as you can see on the image here, these little grass pieces, kind of wrapping around the stem there. Most grasses don't have those. The only grass that you'll see that has an auricle is annual ryegrass. And so if you see little things like that sticking out, you'll pretty much bet on it that it's annual ryegrass for our area. All right, another thing to look at is vernation. All right, and all that is this top brand new leaf. That every new leaf comes right up the middle of the plant. The older leaves are on the outside, and so that emerging leaf coming right up the middle is either going to be folded in half or it's going to be rolled. It's one of the two. And so the one that I happen to have in my hand here, I doubt you can see it with this camera, but it's rolled, it's wrapped around itself. And I've got an image of this kind of grass here that I can show you, but with some big grasses like the one I've got in my hand, it's easy to see. With some really fine bladed grasses like this one, it's really tough to see. And so a lot of times we'll get out a hand lens to see what is the vernation. Is it rolled, is it folded? The grass at the bottom down there is a flat stemmed grass. Grasses are either going to be round or flat. If they're flat, you can guarantee that they're folded. If they're round, they still could be folded, but they also could be rolled. And so it's not a dead giveaway if they're round. All right, bunch type grasses. Like I said, these are grasses that only tiller. And so in this image down here in the bottom left, this one here might have been our original plant, and then all of these other ones are from tillering. New stems and shoots from the original crown. Eventually, each one of these will get their own crown, and they'll have their own hormone system. They'll make their own decisions, all of that stuff. But for us, the grasses that we see in our area, perennial ryegrass, annual ryegrass sometimes, chewings or hard fescue, those are fine fescues. We'll see those occasionally, but not too often. And then annual bluegrass, there's a true annual bluegrass, and there's a perennial type that's kind of confusing. But the annual bluegrass that you have in your yard as a weed at this time of the year is a bunch type grass. It tillers like crazy, but it's a bunch type grass. And so again, all that does, a bunch type grass, it spreads by tillering only. We also have grasses that will spread with stolons. And stolons, as you can see here, are just above ground runners. And so strawberries have stolons as well. We've seen stolons in some shape or form before. Sometimes these things can be long, really long. Sometimes they're fairly short. But of the grasses that we have here, creeping bentgrass is the only one that we have in Kentucky that has stolons only. And creeping bentgrass is a grass that you're only going to find on golf courses. Rhizomes are underground, and these things will spread for some length. But if I talk about determinate rhizomes, these are just short spreading rhizomes. They basically, as you can see here, go down from the crown, and then a new plant will pop up pretty close to the original plant, almost like tillering, but it's actually a good way for the plant to spread. So the big one there for us is Kentucky bluegrass. Tall fescue has these a little bit, but most of the time we consider tall fescue a bunch type grass. Very, very few amount of rhizomes. And then we have grasses that have stolons and rhizomes. And our big two here, Bermuda grass and zoysia grass, we've got these stolons going above the ground and have green leaves on them. We've got rhizomes below the ground that don't have green leaves on them. And that's really the only distinction between them. Stolons are green, rhizomes are beige, off-white. So they're not photosynthesizing, there's no sun hitting those rhizomes, and so we know that they're underground, they're not green. So these are indeterminate. These things can run on and on and on and on and on, depending on the situation. So a really good way for these grasses to spread, obviously with stolons and rhizomes, much better than the bunch type. These are great for athletic fields, golf fairways, places where there's a lot of damage and there needs to be recovery. All right, so here's our growth habits basically. So the top left image, what is that one? That's our bunch type, exactly. So this is perennial ryegrass that you're seeing there. And you can see that's pretty vigorous tillering. It's spreading, no doubt. And eventually these two plants will spread together. But if this is on a outfield of a baseball diamond, high school baseball diamond, and you've got these clumps, what's the concern there? Say again?
Tripping?
Not even covered.
Tripping, rolling an ankle, ball roll, all sorts of things. So this is not ideal, and we want to make sure that we did something about clumps like that in an athletic field type situation. This one over here, which one is that? The one on the right. Stolons, exactly. So above ground, spreading like crazy, and basically with stolons, we talk about them as indeterminate. They just keep running on and on. And then this one obviously has stolons above and rhizomes below. So ideally, we want to see stolons and rhizomes, but it's not a deal breaker, especially when we're talking about lawns. Just don't get the grass beat up enough for that to be a big deal. I'm going to skip over this. This is stuff that's not hugely important. This stuff is way more important than that, Phil. I've already killed 35 minutes here. All right, so a few grasses that we'll talk about here that are acceptable in Kentucky. Talk about why growing grass in Kentucky is not necessarily ideal. But this is something that everybody needs to think about when they start out. When they're choosing a grass for the first time, go through these questions. How is the grass going to be used? If it's a lawn, then it's an older retired couple that only want it for aesthetics, the only time anybody's ever on it is for mowing, then that gives you some options. If there's little kids and dogs running around all the time tearing it up, you probably want to think about different options. If there's shade, some grasses will tolerate a little bit of shade, other grasses will not, period. And so that's a big deal. That's a question I get an awful lot. How can I make my grass grow well underneath that tree? What do you suppose I tell people?
Greg?
I'm a kid, but it's not a good mix between the two different plants. There's an extension pub out there, Trees, Turf, and People, that talks a little bit about it, but these big roots here from the tree, they do so much better than the grasses at pulling in water. And then if there's no light, grasses have to have some light. And so if there's no light, they're just going to struggle. So shade is an issue that we got to think about. Something like in a situation like this where there's nothing growing, I'd probably put in some mulch or something like variety that can handle some pretty dense shade. How hard do you want to work? Some grasses will work you to death and will look great, but they will require an awful lot of input. Or if you're like me, you don't want to do a whole lot of work, then there's different choices. And then investing on the front end and as you go along, fertilizer costs, how often you have to mow, things like that. And so there are ideals for each one of these based on what do you want. And so that's the tough thing. There's so many options. How do you choose the right thing? Well, we can narrow it down an awful lot based on this. You can see I've got things color-coded here, green, orange, and black. Anything in green we don't even want to consider for our environment. Annual ryegrass is only ever used for short-term, basically soil erosion control, and that's it. It's an ugly grass. It grows like crazy, and we don't want to use it. It struggles in our summer heat. The orange grass is on there. My recommendations with reservations. You can see I've got a couple of warm season grasses, Bermuda grass and zoysia grass, and I'll talk to you in a minute here about the difference between warm and cool season grasses. But then on the right side, our cool season grasses, I've got Kentucky bluegrass and fine fescue. most of the time, we shouldn't be dealing with those cool season grasses in Kentucky. Fine fescue will grow in some shade, but if it doesn't get irrigated, it's just not going to make it. It has some really good qualities about it that people that want to be environmentally friendly, they want to see that grass work here, but it does not have the heat tolerance to make it through our summers. Kentucky bluegrass, same issue. It's a grass that it's not adapted for our summers. And so we see an awful lot of it, but these are typically lawns that are being irrigated and pretty high maintenance to make it through looking halfway decent. The black ones I've got on there, recommendations, perennial ryegrass and creeping bentgrass are basically for golf only and tall fescue for lawns. And there's just not much better for us than tall fescue. And here's why we've got a big mess going in Kentucky. We've got this thing running down the middle of the country called the transition zone. Above us, it's cold, short summers. Below us, warm, long summers. So down here, they're going to be growing warm season grasses that are adapted to the heat. Up here, cool season grasses. So we're stuck right in the middle of that. What do we grow, cool or warm season grasses? Well, there's no just definitive answer. We're basically the one place on the planet where we can grow all grasses equally poorly. So it's not an easy place to grow grass. And so we've got hot summers, but we've got cold winters. So our warm season grasses love the summers, hate our winters. The cool season grasses hate the summers, love our winters. And so it's a tough thing, and there's just no grass that's just perfect for us. But we'll talk about maybe the one for lawns that'll do it for us. All right, this is the USDA hardiness zone map. This is the brand new one that just came out, I think, last year. And based on global warming, they've updated this. They've shifted everything north. But you can see three different colors on this map. We've got light green or olive green out here in the western Kentucky, then a lot of the same color green over most of the state, and then there's a few spots in the mountains and by the river that have this darker green. Maybe in those 6A, those dark green areas, we can get away with some Kentucky bluegrass. The rest of the state, though, we need to be thinking about tall fescue for lawns. Maybe up in western Kentucky, a little bit of Bermuda grass and zoysia grass, but most of the state, it's all tall fescue. All right, C3 versus C4. C3 is just another way of saying cool season. C4 is warm season, and that's just how they conduct photosynthesis. The C3 means the first product of photosynthesis has 3 carbons, C4 has 4 carbons. And so you can see there, cool season grasses are C3s. They like moderate temperatures. They're going to do best in the spring and the fall, and they're going to basically shut themselves down in the summertime when we want our lawns to look good. Our warm season grasses, the C4s, they don't do anything in the winter, but they get cranking in the spring and then just absolutely thrive in the heat of the summer. And so you can see why grasses like this would do just fine in Georgia and Florida. They love the summer heat. So that's the big difference that we have with our different grasses. But unfortunately for us, we don't have a cooling period for our cool season grasses here in the middle of the summer. We've got this pretty intense heat that makes them struggle. All right, a couple of differences between C3s and C4s. Again, warm seasons are C4s. They like it hot. They're going to just crank along at 80 to 95, and even if it gets up to 105, they'll still be okay. You don't see a whole lot of heat stress on these things whatsoever. Root growth about the same. The soil's going to be good and hot, and it's not going to affect things. Photorespiration is a bad process that happens during photosynthesis where the plant basically stops making sugars. And if the plant stops making sugars, it's in trouble. It's going to stop growing. So going back to this, these grasses here have photorespiration. These cool season grasses have photorespiration during the summertime. They're not producing as much sugar as they normally would, and so their growth is compromised. It slows way down. These do not have photorespiration, and so they're making sugar nonstop. They do just fine during the heat of the summer. So photorespiration happens during warm periods only with cool season grasses. These warm season grasses go dormant during the wintertime, and in Kentucky, we're probably talking about 6 months of dormancy. They just lay there brown. and then every spring we'll see a new root system. And so that's pretty important for if we're dealing with a warm season grass, making sure that the turf is very healthy going into the wintertime to make sure that it makes it through the winter to produce new roots in the spring. Our cool season grasses, huge difference in optimum temperatures here, 60 to 75 for top growth, much cooler for soil temperatures. And so they like it a lot cooler. You can see 75 there for optimum top growth. We get a lot warmer than 75 here in the summertime. 75 here last week. So that's why this time of the year, these grasses are thriving. They're growing like crazy. If you have a cool season grass yard like bluegrass or fescue, it's probably been growing like crazy the last couple of weeks, but it's going to slow down over the summertime. And that's, again, because of photorespiration and just the concerns with heat on them. Most of the time, in our climate anyways, they don't go dormant. They'll slow down their growth in the wintertime, but they'll keep a green color. Up north in the Dakotas and into Canada, they will turn yellow just like our warm season grasses do. And these will produce root systems all year long as the temperatures are conducive for growth. All right, so here's the grasses that we should consider for Kentucky. All right, so tall fescue. Looking at that image, how does that lawn look to you? Is that pretty decent?
Yes.
It's pretty, isn't it?
Yes.
Here's the thing with tall fescues. Back in the day, all you ever heard about was Kentucky 31 tall fescue. And it got its name. It was found in western Kentucky in 1931. That's where the name comes from. And it was found in a pasture. It's for pastures, period. It should never be planted in yards. These days, we have these things called turf-type tall fescues. And that's what you're seeing in the picture there. They're very, very similar to Kentucky bluegrass. They have good dark color. They're not big and ugly like Kentucky 31. And they make a really good thick lawn. And so these turf-type tall fescues are really, really good for us to be thinking about for lawns. If you look down at the bottom here, these originally came from southern Europe, and so warm temperatures. And so that kind of gives us a clue as to why these things do pretty well in Kentucky, because they came from an area of the world where it's fairly warm. All right, identifying tall fescue, we looked at that live little piece that I showed you kind of sort of in front of the camera. But the vernation on them rolled. If you cut through them, you can see that it's rolled, or if you look at the very top leaf that's emerging right up the middle of any of these plants, it'll be rolled around itself. It just wraps, just like you're rolling up a pinwheel or something. The serrated edge thing, this is something that is a really useful way to identify tall fescue. The edge of the leaf, all you do is take it and you rub it against your lip, and you can feel it's got a rough feel to it. If you've got a tall fescue lawn, do that, assuming that you haven't sprayed any chemicals recently. Just grab a piece and just rub it against your lip. You can feel it just feels like a serrated knife. It has just a little edge to it. And that's a good way to identify tall fescue. And I'm telling you, if you know your grasses and you can walk into somebody's yard and say, oh yeah, your fescue's looking great, you're going to blow people's minds. That's the thing that people just can't get over. If you know your weeds and you know your grasses, that just impresses people to no end.
Sexy.
I'm sorry I missed that.
It's great. You're right.
I don't know about this group. All right. Small oracles, those are those little things that wrap around the stem, but we don't really see much. They would just come around from the big leaf here and wrap around the front of the stem, but we don't really see much for tall fescue. Very veiny leaves. You'll see the veins on the leaves like you do in this image. Really easy to pick out, especially with the bigger tall fescues, but certainly all the fescues, you'll see the veins. And you won't see a whole bunch of veins with Kentucky bluegrass. Not much of a ligule. It's hard to see, and so it's one of those things I just basically say it's not there. But this thing, this purple at the base of the plant, is a really good identification characteristic. You see all this purple down here? When you pull a plant up out of the ground, you got the crown and the roots and everything. The very bottom will be purple. It's not going to happen on every plant you pull up, but if you pull up 5 plants, I bet you 3 out of the 5 will have that purple. You may have to do something like this, where you're pulling leaves back to see the purple underneath. It may not be as distinct as you see in this image, but you will see purple. And so fescues and rye, all the fescues, fine fescues, and tall fescues, and perennial rye and annual ryegrass all will have purple at the base. Kentucky bluegrass will not. And so, again, most of the grasses you're going to see in lawns are Kentucky bluegrass and tall fescue. There's a couple of good things to look at. The veins on fescue, Kentucky bluegrass won't have that, and the purple, Kentucky bluegrass won't have that. The other thing, very stiff-bladed. It's just, if you try to push down the leaves, it's just a very rigid plant. It's not the softest plant in the world. Kentucky bluegrass is much softer. And then depending on the situation, you may see clumps of tall fescue. You won't see that so much for Kentucky bluegrass. All right, some advantages and disadvantages real quick of tall fescue. Color's good. Doesn't take a whole lot of fertilizer, and that's, to me, a good thing. We don't want to be throwing a whole lot of fertilizer around haphazardly. Wear tolerance is good, and so kids and dogs, not a big deal. Shade tolerance is pretty decent. That's an important thing for lawns. Most of the time we've got trees and building shade, and so this is something that's going to work. And this is a big distinction over Kentucky bluegrass. Kentucky bluegrass does not have shade tolerance, period. Drought avoider, and all that means is that this plant, when it senses drought, is going to send down deeper roots to try and find more water. And so it's going to stay green longer than Kentucky bluegrass, because when Kentucky bluegrass senses drought, it's just going to want to go dormant, and it's going to turn brown. To some people, that's great because they don't have to mow for several weeks. But for others, they want to have a green lawn all summer long. Heat tolerance is good, and that's obviously why we want to grow it in Kentucky. And then we have this thing called an endophyte, which is a fungus that lives inside of the plant. Most of the time we think of a fungus being a bad thing, causes disease. But an endophyte is a type of fungus that is passed on to seed. So you buy endophyte infected seed. So it comes that way. It's going to say on the bag infected with endophytes. But these endophytes will give stress tolerance, increase the heat tolerance, reduce the insect feeding, reduce the disease pressure, things like that. So all sorts of good things from having this fungus living inside of the plant. The fungus will then take sugars and things for it to grow. The bad things over here on the right, texture is not perfect. It's a little bit big compared to Kentucky bluegrass, but like I said, these new turf types, not too bad at all. Bunch type, and so doesn't recover well because it doesn't have stolons and rhizome. It just recovers only from tillering. And then this disease of brown patch, if you've heard of any disease on tall fescue, this would be the one. Most of the time these days, it's not that big of a deal if we're managing it properly. But a lot of times it comes down to how we're fertilizing our tall fescue, and that's going to dictate whether we get brown patch or not. All right, so here's your Kentucky 31 that I mentioned. And you can see on there it says lawn and field seed. That lawn should not be on there. This should just be field seed. If you walk into Walmart or whatever store, you're going to see this on the shelf, and it's going to be cheap. Hang on, Sarah. Let me finish this, and I'll open it up to some questions. So this Kentucky 31 is going to be really cheap. People are going to go for it because it's way cheaper than any other type of tall fescue. But I promise you, in the long run, this type of lawn is going to cost you a lot more money because it grows much faster than the turf type tall fescues, and it doesn't look as good either. And so stay away from Kentucky 31. That's what I say to Kentucky 31. Keep it in the pastures. All right, questions?
If you see brown patches in your yard, what do you do?
Did you hear that, Greg?
No, I didn't.
If you see brown patches, quote unquote, in your yard, what do you do?
Pray.
Pray.
No, I can't. It's not that big of a deal. It will hurt your tall fescue, and it certainly can kill some grass, but most of the time it's not that big of a concern to us. You can spray chemicals on it, but a lot of times if we just change the conditions of why we're getting the disease. So if it's really hot, putting the irrigation on and cooling the plants down, changing the mowing higher. A lot of times we get to brown patch because we've overdone it with nitrogen. We put out too much nitrogen fertilizer, and that's going to cause it. But if we get these brown patches and we know that it's a disease and not something else causing it, like a spill of some sort or dog urine, you can tell that the patch is growing. You can spray fungicides. You can buy fungicides at Southern States and garden centers that will take care of it. But most of the time, once the environmental conditions change, it cools off or whatever, the brown patch will go away. But if it is something that you're concerned you're going to lose grass, go and buy a fungicide. And there's a whole bunch that you can pick up, like I said, at places like Southern States or Lowe's or whatever. So, good question. Any other questions?
Any experience with RTF?
Yeah. The question was RTF, rhizomatous tall fescue, and my dealings with it, I don't think it's all that spectacular. I don't see, once you get a thick stand of tall fescue, the plants are so crowded that you don't see much rhizome production. Sports turf managers tell me that they like using the RTF, the rhizomatous tall fescue, because when they get thin areas from divoting from cleats or whatever, it fills in a little bit faster. And so I can understand that, but in a home lawn, probably not worth spending the money on an RTF. And if there's some seed people in the audience, you're probably going to be cussing me. The RTF is it's expensive, but it's not probably way different than the other turf type tall fescues. We'll talk about clover. We're an hour in. We need to book. Tracy's got a question coming in. Question is, how do you feel about using warm season grass and cool season grass in the same lawn? Usually they don't work too well together, especially if we're dealing with Bermuda grass, because it's such an aggressive grower that it just grows over the cool season grasses and just takes over. Most people, if you have Bermuda grass in your lawn, you see that patch get bigger and bigger and bigger year after year after year, and that is by far the #1 question I get from homeowners. How do I control the Bermuda grass that's growing as a weed in my yard? You can grow zoysia grass with tall fescue because they're both fairly slow growers, and it's all about managing mowing heights, raising the height up a little bit in the summertime to favor the tall fescue, so it doesn't die out, and then dropping it a little bit in the fall. Timing your fertilizer, okay, but most of the time we don't want to see that. Any other questions? Nothing else? Okay, let's quickly jump through tall fescue here, or excuse me, Kentucky bluegrass here. Couple of things to look at with Kentucky blue. You see it has the point of the leaf kind of sort of looks like a canoe. So it has a boat-shaped tip. And that's a really good way to identify if you've got Kentucky bluegrass or any kind of bluegrass. All the bluegrasses, even annual bluegrass, the Poa annua that you get as a weed in your yard in the spring, has that boat-shaped tip. We don't see much for rhizomes. We don't really see a ligule. And this one is folded, the vernation on it, but sometimes Kentucky blue can be small enough where that's pretty hard to see. And so look at that boat-shaped tip. And this picture here kind of makes it look veiny, but I promise you this is not a veiny plant at all. Really all we see is running right up the middle of the leaf, two lines that kind of look like railroad tracks. And that's all we see on that leaf, all the way from the base to the top. And so if you look at these side by side, Kentucky blue versus tall fescue, totally different looking leaves. And so the veins alone will give tall fescue away compared to Kentucky bluegrass. You can see here a lot more disadvantages for Kentucky blue than advantages. The color and the texture are great. I love Kentucky bluegrass. I grew up with that. That's what we had in our yard. And to me, it's a great barefoot grass. It's really soft under the feet, but because we're so warm here, it's just not a great choice for us. The heat tolerance, the traffic tolerance, the drought avoidance thing, like I said, it just goes dormant. As soon as it senses drought, it just shuts itself down, which I like, but because it loses color, people don't care for that. No shade tolerance, likes nitrogen, and it has all sorts of disease and insect issues that we have to deal with. And so if we're over-fertilizing, if we're irrigating, we're going to have issues with grubs, we're going to have issues with diseases. And these are some of the diseases that we will see on Kentucky bluegrass. Very, very common to see these things at lawn height. Usually with lawns, we don't get a whole lot of diseases because they're not bad under stress, but Kentucky bluegrass, because it's not adapted for our climate, just gets tore up. I'm not going to talk about Bermuda grass. Basically for our area, it's for athletic fields only, maybe for occasionally for golf courses, but for athletic fields it's great because it has stolons and rhizomes and recovers really well. But this is a grass that's going to be dormant for 6 months of the year. And so for football, fine. But even soccer, where they'd be playing in the spring and late into the fall, that field's going to get pretty tore up. We're not going to... This is kind of an interesting one because it has... The issue with Bermuda grass is it doesn't have good cold tolerance. Zoysia grass does. And so this is an option for us for a low maintenance type lawn, and we're doing some research at UK looking at this, but because this is a warm season grass, does fine in our summers, deals with the drought, deals with the heat, doesn't need a whole lot of nitrogen, doesn't need much water, doesn't grow very fast. This is a really good option for us. So like I said, we're playing with this one to see, is this going to be a better, more economically, more environmentally friendly option for a lawn for us in Kentucky? So we're doing carbon sequestration work with it currently to see will it outperform tall fescue and some other grasses. But it's a cool grass, and you'll see it oftentimes on golf courses on bunker faces because it just doesn't grow fast and doesn't spread out into the sand where other grasses will. You'll also see it in areas that have shade because it has shade tolerance. So there's another reason we want to consider it for a lawn. So certainly some good things about it. It's going to be dormant in the wintertime, just like Bermuda grass. But to me, that's not a bad thing. It means I'm not having to mow for several months. And so if people can embrace that, and if we can see that it makes it through our summers and winters, no problems, then this could be a real winner for us. All right, establishing, we'll run through this really quick. This is one of those things that if you mess establishment up, you're going to be messed up for the rest of your time you have that lawn. This establishment's all about doing things right the first time so you don't have to come back time and time and time again and fix it. And so spending a little bit of money up front is way, way better than spending a whole lot of money down the road. All right. Question? Okay. I'm sure the other speakers for your other classes have beaten you over the head with soil testing. If they haven't, they need to. Soil testing is so important to know where you're at, where you're starting from, what you should be adding. If you don't know what's in the soil, you don't know what you should be adding to the soil. And so this is your starting point for everything that you do is that soil test. And so before I ever establish anything, I'll go do a soil test. It's cheap. I'm not sure if Jefferson County costs the same as us here in Fayette County, but we're $7 here at our extension office. And that's nothing. If you take one from the front yard, one from the backyard, $14 for your whole yard, take it once every 3 to 5 years, you're in good shape. So soil testing is your first step. So the reason we want to do a soil test is if the soil test comes back and tells us that the pH is crazy or that our phosphorus or potassium levels are low, we can put a whole bunch of these materials down at one time and put them into the soil because there's no grass there to burn. If there's grass there, we can only put a little bit on at a time. It takes a long time to get incorporated. And so the soil test is going to tell us what we can put in, and we can put a lot in. Ideally, what we've got on the left here is what we want to do. We want to till everything up. We want to start with a good, firm seed bed like we've got there. Plant into that. We're going to rake the seeds in slightly so that they just barely get into the soil. We want good seed-soil contact. So much better of a situation than taking a power rake and just kind of thinning out what's there. I'm not saying that this won't work, but this on the left works so much better. Obviously, this takes you a long time. And so most people, when they're overseeding in the fall, planting more cool season grass into their lawn, they will do this, because this will tear up what's there a little bit, get some slits into the soil. They can drop the seed in, and does a pretty decent job. But nothing ever takes the place of doing things right the first time and getting it good and thick. All right, again, if the soil test tells you you're deficient in anything, you can till these things into the 4 to 6 inch depth. That's about where grass roots sit. And so getting deeper than that is pretty useless. Rough grading, before we ever deal with topsoil, rough grading is important just to shape the land how you want it to look, and then come in with your topsoil and finish off that same exact slope or whatever you've created with that rough grading. So just smoothing things out to make sure that water is moving away from the house, things like that. And dealing with subgrade, the picture on the bottom right here is something that I see an awful lot in new neighborhoods. The contractor will come through, they'll build the house, they'll leave their debris all over the place, and a contractor will come in and just lay sod over chunks of rock and brick and whatever, and there may be a ½ inch of topsoil between that rock and the sod, and that's going to just result in failure. And so obviously you don't have a whole lot of control over that, but if you are building a new house, make sure that you're getting out there and making sure that somebody is picking up this mess that they create when they build houses. And that's something, if you live in a new neighborhood, you probably don't have a great lawn, great yard, because they've removed your topsoil. And that's something that absolutely drives me crazy, is they sell the topsoil from your yard. They may even sell it back to you, but that's another way that contractors will make some money on the side. But they leave you with very poor soil to try and grow your plants in. And these subsoils that we have, when the topsoil is removed, not good drainage, not good soils are high in clay, not good for growing any plants in. Drainage is very important, and so if you know there's low areas in the yard, wet soils are just as bad as really dry soils, and so taking care of wet soils are really important. And then once you get your rough grade and your final grade, your topsoil down and how you want it to look, just smooth it down. I usually will just pack it somehow. Anything you have to roll something down is good enough, but you don't want really fluffy soil because it'll settle like crazy. And then what I'll do is take one of those leaf rakes, the fan rakes that I'm not sure what they're called, but I'll just flip it up so the teeth are upwards, and I'll just kind of drag that over the top of the soil and mix the seed and the soil a little bit. You don't want the seed buried too deeply, because then it runs out of energy before it ever makes it to the surface. But mixed into the soil a little bit is a good thing. The last thing you want to do is put out a starter fertilizer, and the bag will say starter fertilizer on it. And these things are usually just high in phosphorus. Phosphorus is just important because it improves germination, improves establishment, but phosphorus is not mobile in the soil, and we don't have a root system to go out and find it, and so we're bringing the phosphorus to our plants. Methods of propagation, we won't spend any time on that. Seed tags, though, this is fairly important. When you're going to seed, you want to always look for this blue tag. This blue tag is going to tell you that it's certified seed. By law, what that bag says it has in it, it has in it. And so, again, spending a few dollars to make sure that you've got certified seed is going to help you down the road. Because if you look at the specifics on this tag, you can see that the wheat seed 0%. If you don't have certified seed, you may be buying something with 5% weed seed in it, and that's going to cause you headaches down the road. So buy the certified seed. So on your seed tag, these are the things that you want to look for: purity, germination, and pay attention to when the test date was. It will always tell you when that seed was tested. In this case, it was 0908. Inert matter is just junk that's come along for the ride that's not going to germinate and grow. And then noxious weeds. Usually weed seeds we can take care of, but if they're noxious weeds, those are tough to control. And so we don't want to see any noxious weeds whatsoever. And so those are the things to pay attention to on a seed tag. We've also got this thing when we talk about seed called pure live seed. So that's what this PLS at the top is. And you always want to calculate pure live seed when you're putting out new plantings. All this is a really simple calculation. If you look at this tag down here, we've got 32% Greenkeeper Tall Fescue, 32% Fidelity Tall Fescue, 29.5% Coyote 2 Tall Fescue, and then 4.89% Raven Kentucky Bluegrass. So all I've done over here under purity is added all those four numbers together as percentages, and it's given me a purity of 99.12%. The germination on here, 90 plus 90 plus 90 plus 90 plus 85. Add those all together and divide them by 4. Our germination average is 88.75. So both of those numbers are pretty decent. Those would be very acceptable numbers that I'd be very happy with. To calculate our pure live seed, all we do is multiply purity by germination, and our purity there, 0.99. We get rid of the percentage and you take that to a decimal, 0.99 times 0.88. And that gives us 0.8797 or 87.97% pure live seed. And all that number means to us is if I'm recommending down here at the bottom 7 pounds of this seed goes on per 1,000 square feet, all we're going to do is take this number into account. So 7 divided by 0.8797 is going to give us, we almost have to put out 8 pounds of actual seed to give us what's going to germinate and grow. And that's a really important thing. Not that big of a deal in this case because both the germination and purity numbers are high, but because so much seed comes coated these days, the purity numbers will be half of what we see here. And so it may be 50%, it may be 46%. And so when you're talking about 46% times 88%, it's a huge deal. We have to double the amount of seed that we're putting out. And so this pure live seed calculation is a really simple thing to do, but it can help an awful lot at the beginning of this whole process. Everybody got that? No big deal? All right. Seeding depth, like I said, is pretty important. We don't want the seed to get too deep. As you can see there, for tall fescue, this is probably ideal. For really small seeds like Bermuda grass or Kentucky bluegrass, 1/4 inch or so is probably good. This seed soil contact thing, just critical. You don't want to just have seed laying over the surface because it's just not going to do very well. It could very well wash away. It's not going to have access to water. It's not going to get stuck down like it would if it was covered with a little bit of soil. So seed soil contact, very important. A bunch of different ways to get seed out there. Most of the time with lawns we're dealing with some kind of a spreader, whether it's a little rotary spreader like this person's got in their hands, or drop spreaders where you just have a little 30-foot wide drop spreader. But all sorts of different ways we can plant seeds. Mulching, pretty important thing to do. And the reason we want to mulch is that it keeps the seed in place and it keeps moisture to the seed. And so if you don't have an irrigation system, this is a good thing to have out there, covering the seed, keeping the moisture in place. And on slopes, it's a really important thing as well. So straw is what we want to put out, not hay, because hay is going to come with seeds and you're going to get other plants growing in your lawn. And then 1 to 2 bales per 1,000 square feet. Occasionally you see some wheat growing where you put out the wheat straw, but once you start mowing it, it'll go away. Sodding, everybody likes to sod because you've got an instant yard. And when we're dealing with sod, what we're going to do is everything that we talked about for planting seed, doing our soil test, getting the subgrade done, another final grade, and putting in drainage and all those things we talked about. We're going to do all the same steps. Instead of planting seed, we're just going to lay sod over that firm soil. And the important things to do with laying sod, as you can see here, all the pieces are kind of stair-stepped. And so all these seams aren't going to line up. We don't want a whole bunch of seams because that's easy for water to run through those seams. The other thing you see in a big area like this is somebody's out there watering while people are laying sod. It's critical because you've cut the root system off when this sod was harvested. It's critical to get water to it immediately. Just another way of laying sod, big roll. This probably would have been much better for Missouri's infield there than the small pallets that they were putting out. Sprigging and stolonizing is just taking grasses that have stolons and rhizomes, shredding it up, and then either like you see down here at the bottom, planting by hand, or putting into machines and cutting those vegetative pieces into the ground. And it works really well. The grass will spread pretty well from those stolons and rhizomes spreading. Just take a little bit of time. After the grass starts to come up, there's a few things we've got to pay close attention to. So irrigation, if you don't have irrigation, making sure that you're putting the seed down at the right time of the year is pretty important. And for our cool season grasses, that right time of the year is fall, early in the fall. We're going to have good rainfall coming up, and so hopefully irrigation won't be that big of a deal to us. But if we don't have water of some sort, the seed just cannot germinate. They have to imbibe that water to get going. So your rule of thumb with irrigation is you want to keep the soil wet, moist, wet enough so it's not puddling. If it's puddling, your seed's going to be washing around and stuff. So moist but not puddling. Your fertilizer, your starter fertilizer should last you for about a month or so, and at this point, you can come back in with about a half a pound of nitrogen, and then that'll get things cranking along until you get to your plants are going to be fairly mature after 2 months, and you can fertilize them as they ought to be. But getting the fertilizer to them to make sure that they're spreading and filling in is very important. And then mowing, a lot of people will let their grasses grow up as high as can be, and then just hack it down to where they want it to be growing. And that's not the thing to do at all. We have to keep in mind this thing called a 1/3 rule, that you never want to take more than 1/3 of the leaf blade at one time. So as you can see here in my little example, if your intended height is 2 inches, once the grass reaches 3 inches, go ahead and mow. And so by doing this, you'll get out there a little bit early. The grass may not be totally filled in, but it's going to start filling in from the mowing. The mowing will help that. Timing with our warm season grasses, if we're planting them, we're going to do them first thing in the summer, as soon as the temperatures start getting decently warm, late May, early June. With our cool season grasses, this stuff's really important. This will drive me absolutely crazy as I drive around town seeing signs and different things. But for our cool season grasses, we want to be planting in the fall, early fall, late August to early October. That's the perfect time for us to be planting our cool season lawns, fescues and bluegrasses. All of these reasons, no grassy weeds coming up with them. We've got cool temperatures. We've got good rainfall typically, and then we've got a whole long time before these plants will encounter the heat of the summertime, so they can get mature and they can get tough. A lot of people want to spray in the spring, and I think part of the reason there is at the end of the year in August and September, people are sick to death of dealing with their lawn. The last thing they want to do is go out and put out seed. And so they wait till spring, and they do it then. People are all excited about being in the yard. They do their thing then. But it's a tricky thing because this summer stress comes on. These weak little seedlings are going to be in trouble. And so if I didn't have an irrigation system or kids to drag hose around, I wouldn't even attempt. There's no guarantee with the spring seeding that it's going to make it. So this bush forsythia, that's your rule of thumb. You want to get your seed out by about the time that stuff's blooming. Our cool season grasses are going to germinate about when forsythia blooms. And so if you have to spring seed, get them out there before forsythia is blooming so they'll germinate right about the time that it does bloom. There's a couple of products that you can apply for weeds because you're going to have weed problems. and crabgrass will absolutely run over cool season grass seedlings. The first one there is Sidgeron, and you can put that right when you're seeding. It doesn't affect the cool season grass seeds at all, but I've never had great success with it. I don't think it's that great of a herbicide. Drive is a product that you can put out 14 days after germination, and it does a pretty good job on seeding crabgrass. There's a new product out though from Scott's, and it's a weed and feed product. And usually I say don't buy a weed and feed, but because this product you'd be putting out in the spring for a spring planting, it's a good thing to use if you're planting in the spring. And so I'm not sure what the name is other than Scott's, whatever their weed and feed is called, but look for the herbicide on the label called mesotrione, mesotrione, mesotrione. Up until this product, this chemical was not allowed to be used on lawns, and it's an absolutely great product for seedling crabgrass, and you can put it right down when you put out your seed. So, pretty excited about that. All right, 20 after 7. Talk a little bit about soils. Any questions about establishment before we get into soils?
Good here.
All right, I'm dumping beverage on myself here. Let's deal with a little bit about soils here. So, like I said, with our new constructions, we've got, well, in any perfect soil, we've got our surface, we've got our A horizon, which is topsoil. This is a good dark brown stuff that's got good organic material in it, lots of good nutrients, drains well, on and on. Our B and C horizons, the subsoil, these are things we don't want to be growing plants in. But unfortunately, the contractor comes along and he pushes all of that off, and we're left with junk. And so that's a tough situation for us to deal with for lawns. And it's going to be one of those cases where you're always going to be doing something to try and make it better. We're starting some research with a new graduate student here this year about how to make these kind of soils easier to grow plants on, whether they're landscape plants or grass plants. Soil texture, all that means is sand, silt, or clay. So the different sizes of particles that are in the soil. Clay is really small, silt's a little bit bigger, sands are very large. And so obviously if you have a very sandy soil, it's easy for water to move through those particles, drains very well. If you've got a clayey soil, it's very hard for water to get through those tiny little particles, and it doesn't drain very well. Clays compact very easily, and so if you have a lot of traffic on the lawn, you're going to have a harder soil. And so those are things to be thinking about. Nutrient holding is also a concern. Leaching is a concern because water moves through sand particles so easily. Fertilizers will leach down through the soil. Our soils in Kentucky, we don't have really sandy soils, we have loamy soils. And all that means is we've got a good mix of sand, silt, and clay. Really good soils for central Kentucky. And so for the most part, we really can't complain based on other places in the country. In a perfect world, this is what we'd have. Half of the soil would be the solid, soil, whether it's sand, silt, or clay, whatever, a little bit of organic material in there, and then the other half would just be open. Some of that would be filled with water, and the rest would be just air. If roots don't have a good mix of air and water, they cannot grow. And so we don't want saturated soils, all of this filled up with water, because the roots cannot grow through that soil. If this is 95% minerals or hard in a compacted soil case, roots can't grow. And so we want to see ideally something like we've got on this image right here. And here's basically the same thing in these test tubes. Look at the plant on the right there that's on a compacted soil. The plant itself is struggling, really small plant, and what do you see for roots in there? I don't see anything. And so that hard soil, the roots just cannot grow through it. And so if we have a hard soil, that's something that we need to deal with. Medium compaction, there's still some roots, the plant's struggling a little bit, but compared to the non-compaction, that plant is cranking. And so in a perfect world, we're going to have nice loose soils for plant growth. Compaction, all with compaction, all that's going on is traffic is compressing particles together. in this image right here, you can see work, so footprint or a tire track or whatever, pushing particles together, so we lose all these pore spaces. And that's all compaction is we're losing these pore spaces, so we have less air pores, we have less space for water. So hard soils, as you can see in this image, are going to result in grass not growing. It just cannot. So the traffic itself is wearing this out, but the fact that the soils are hard under there makes it so the grasses cannot come back. The issues with compaction here, we have less oxygen space in the soil. Without oxygen, roots cannot grow. And if the roots can't grow, the plant's in big trouble. Poor drainage, which is going to lead to less oxygen, and again, the same issue. Hard soils, roots are kind of sissy. If they run into a hard soil, they just cannot grow. And so they hit that hard layer and they just stop. We see other weeds that come up in these hard soils that don't have any sort of issue growing in them at all, and they will take over our turf plants. Goosegrass, knotweed, spurge, those are ones that we typically will see in hard soils. And then we're talking sports turf, there's been studies that show higher risk of player injuries if the soils are compacted. And so when I talk to sports turf managers dealing with youth soccer, this is something that I really harp on, making sure that that field is dealt with, making sure that it's not hard. So, question for you, how do you know if your soil is hard or not? What do you do? Can you tell it just by walking across it? How about it? Well, you can't really tell. There is a expensive fancy thing you can buy called a penetrometer, and all you do is push on it like you see in there. There's a little meter on top that tells you exactly how hard that soil is. Cost you a few $100s. I don't know anybody that's running out to buy these things unless they're in research or whatever. Best thing to do, run into the kitchen, sneak a steak knife, take it out there with moist soils with just the force of your thumb. If y'all can see my thumb here. With just the force of your thumb, if you can push that knife down into the soil, it's probably not hard enough to worry about. And so, like I said, most home lawns, you're going to be able to push that knife down into the soil, no problem. If you cannot, though, it's probably something that we need to deal with because the grass is going to suffer. So one way we deal with that is through cultivation or aerification, another way to talk about it. So reasons that we would aerify are for compaction of the hard soils. The other thing is for thatch. This big layer of dead plant parts is called thatch. And we don't want to have a whole lot of thatch because you can see the root system is growing in there. The roots can't get water and nutrients out of this layer like they can if they're down in the soil. And so the plants will struggle if they're in that thatch layer. So we want to get rid of if we have too much thatch. So we have hard soils, we have thatch. Most of the time we're going to hollow tine core aerify. And that's just punching holes, removing material, and letting oxygen down into the soil. You can backfill these things, but you're backfilling with nice loose material. It's not hard. It's going to be a much better situation for the plants than it is if it's this in hard soils. So that's all it is, punching holes, removing material, and letting the plants have some oxygen. A lot of benefits for hollow tine corification. Water moving through and into the soil. More air in the soil, thatch gets broken down and removed, so you're pulling thatch out. But microbes in the soil will eat on thatch and break it down, and they need oxygen to do their thing, and so oxygen helps that. And we're pulling material out so that we're actually removing compaction. The only thing that I pay attention to here is when you're doing this. There's so much damage because you're actually slicing through crowns and stolons and rhizomes. It's a lot of stress on the plant. And so if your cool season grasses are under heat stress in the summertime, which they probably are, we don't want to be thinking about hollow tine corification. So when's the best time for cool season grasses to think about this?
September.
Sure, sometime in the fall or in the spring when the grass is growing like gangbusters and can recover. And so that's the only thing that I would pay attention to with hollow tine corification is when you're doing it. But like I said, most lawns aren't going to need to do this unless If you've got a heavy lawn tractor that you're mowing your lawn with, that's going to cause compaction over time. And so doing that knife test on that type of soil is probably something that would be a good thing. Frequency of aerification, it kind of depends on what kind of soil you have. Do you have a clayey soil that compacts easily or a sandy soil that doesn't? Do you have a grass like Kentucky bluegrass or zoysia produces a lot of thatch? If not, you may not need to air all that often. And then the more fertilizer and the more water and the more that we're doing to the grass, the more thatch it's going to get built up, the more compaction we're going to have, and that's going to dictate how often we need to do it. But if we're doing things properly, not messing around with the lawn too much, not doing too much in terms of fertility and all that stuff, we shouldn't have to worry too much about cultivation. All right, mowing really quickly. This one to me is the no-brainer. At least you'd think it would be. But this is the thing that we do more than anything else, and so this is the thing that we can mess up by far the most often. So look at this image, and tell me, what do you see there that's not right? What's the issue in that picture?
Oh, too low.
About too late.
Dead grass.
A bunch of dead grass, exactly. A bunch of clumps of dead grass over top of the surface. And I heard somebody said they mowed too late. You're exactly right. So the grass grew up tall, somebody came through and hacked it down and just left the clippings where they were. So if you were to come through there and kick those clippings out of the way, what would you see underneath? Okay, so underneath there, the grass is going to be yellowing. It's not going to be photosynthesizing properly. It's going to be struggling. But even if you don't have that issue, just the fact that you've got this ugly dead grass on top is bad enough. And so in a situation like this, if you ever have to remove more than 1/3 of the leaf blade at one time, raking or blowing or going through and mowing it again to get rid of those clippings is a good thing. You notice I didn't say bagging. Bagging your clippings is about the worst thing you can possibly do. If you want to go green and you want to be lazy about it, don't bag your clippings. It's the easiest thing you can possibly do. 25% of your yearly fertilizer budget comes from clippings going down into the soil and just breaking down and releasing free fertilizer to your plants. How simple is that? And so that's the most sustainable way I can tell you to grow grass. Just let your clippings fall. Make sure that you're mowing them more than the person did in this image so you don't have that big mess. But clippings break down so quickly, they don't produce thatch, things like that. And it's really, really good for your soil. Really good for those urban soils that have the topsoil removed because it will improve soils over time, improve those poor subsoils over time. So never taking more than 1/3 or so off at one time. Here, looking at this little table below here, if you take more than 1/3 of the leaf blade off at one time, just the effects that you have on the root system of the plant. And so if this is spring or summer, probably not a big deal. Your plants are so happy, they love the temperature and they're getting moisture and all that stuff, probably not a big deal. But if you're doing this in the summertime and you happen to scalp your plants down, you're really negatively affecting the root system. And when we already have that photorespiration thing going on when the grass is not growing properly anyways, you've got potential huge stress on your grasses. And when you have the double stress of the temperature plus mowing stress, you're looking at good chance of disease. And so somebody asked about brown patch earlier, not messing around with things like this, making sure that you're staying on your mowing schedule, not taking too much off. Really, really good way to minimize disease pressure. Sharp is very important too. Sharp mower blades. There you go, Sarah. That one's for you. The image down there at the bottom left, all that is a dull blade coming through and hacking against the plants and tearing them. The issue with mowing is every time we mow, it's a stress on the plant. We're cutting off leaf tip. And so normally if we've got a sharp blade, the leaf tip is going to heal over, the plant's going to grow pretty much normal. But if we've got a dull blade, as you can see in this little illustration here, not only does it look raggedy like we have in the picture, but after a couple of days, that plant is putting its energy into repairing the tears rather than its normal growth. And so all that is sharpening the mower blade. Really easy thing to do. or if you don't want to do it, really quick and cheap thing to do at a shop. The other thing for me, with these open ends, because they stay open and don't heal very well, disease gets in it. And so again, we want to mow properly, we want to sharpen our blades because it's a disease factor. So reducing disease is as easy as sharpening more blades. To me though, because I'm so cheap, this is what matters to me. Dull blades takes more engine power to cut through the grass blades. And so it takes more engine power, it's going to use more fuel. And so if you're cheap like I am, or if you're environmentally conscious and you don't want to be using a whole lot of fuel, sharpen your blade. It's a really, really simple thing to do. Clippings we talked about, again, that's there's all sorts of good reasons to keep your clippings on your lawn. At the very least, put them in your flower beds. Don't just send them to the landfill. But there's no reason to compost with them because they compost themselves really easily in the lawn. Some mowing height ranges. These are all kind of sort of on the lower side. I'd even like to see tall fescue up 2.5 to 3.5 even, especially as you go into the summertime. The taller that you mow, the less stress that the grass is going to be under. And so 2.5 may be a good spring and summer height, whereas 3.5 may be a really good summer height. I say, spring and fall height, sorry, and then summer height. And then Kentucky bluegrass, 2 inches in the spring and fall, 2.5, 3 inches in the summertime. The big thing here, you can see here, the shorter that you mow, the less root system you have. We want deep roots in the summertime. We don't have a whole lot of rain falling. And so that's one thing. We want a long leaf blade to photosynthesize in the summertime as well. We want tougher plants, and so raising that height up is going to affect that. All right, fertilizer. Anybody feeling a little overwhelmed right now? Too much information coming? Nobody? So if you're feeling overwhelmed, I've got you exactly where I want you. That's a good thing. There's so much to this. It's crazy. You never think about lawns the same way after you start going through these master gardener cut classes, because there's so many things that nobody ever thinks about that are critical to keeping a good looking lawn. Fertilizer. So, like I said, soil testing really important. Every 3 to 5 years, that's what we want to see. And this is the one thing here that wears on me a little bit. You go to the garden centers and you buy triple 13, triple 19, or whatever, and you sling it out there. Well, why are we putting phosphorus and potassium out if the soil test says you don't need it? We don't know whether the soil needs it unless we do a soil test. Most of the time, though, in a good rule of thumb, our soils in central Kentucky are good enough that they don't need a whole lot of P&K. And so all you're doing is wasting money and polluting when you're putting out these fertilizers that have P&K if the soil doesn't need it. If it does need it, that's a different story. The other thing on here, you can go to the garden center and buy the $80 a bag of fertilizer, or you can go to the ag store and buy the $20 a bag fertilizer. It doesn't matter. The grass doesn't care. It's not in the labels. And so once that fertilizer gets into the soil, the roots, all they know is fertilizer. That's it. So buy the cheap stuff. The only difference that you're going to see is the particle sizes will be bigger on the ag fertilizers than they will be on the fancy yard fertilizers. There's nothing wrong with a fertilizer like Miracle-Gro, nothing wrong at all. But if you do a cost analysis of that versus something you buy that's ag grade, you are paying through the nose for that Miracle-Gro. The other thing here, just when you're putting out fertilizer, I saw one of my neighbors doing this the other night, slinging fertilizer onto the sidewalk, onto the street. When that happens, that's the worst thing you can do. That's just going straight into the storm system and polluting. And so just be really careful. If you don't have a shield that you can put down on the side of your spreader that will stop fertilizer from spreading out in the street, make sure that you're just not getting close enough. Your last pass, the fertilizer particles are only reaching to where the sidewalk starts. All right, some really basics here. I know somebody else has covered this stuff, but the numbers on the bag there, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium in that order. And so from guys like me, you're going to get some right. I'm going to tell you put out 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year, or 2 pounds of nitrogen, whatever. I'm going to give you a rate. And so once you get that rate, all you're going to do is, based on the fertilizer that you have, you can use 100, it's fine, but you can use 1 as well. So if we use 100, we take the 5% nitrogen that's on that bag of fertilizer, 100 divided by 5, we got to put out 20 pounds of this fertilizer to get 1 pound of actual nitrogen. And so that's a big deal. 1 pound of actual nitrogen, this is how we deal with it. You can do it with just, if I say 1 pound of actual nitrogen, take the 100 away there and just have 1. Take this down to the decimal rather than in a percent, so it's 0.005. 1 divided by 0.005 is 20. So it's the exact same calculation. So 20 pounds of a 5% nitrogen product to give you 1 pound of actual nitrogen. The thing is, like I said, though, with the phosphorus and potassium, if you're putting out 20 pounds of this product to get 1 pound of actual nitrogen, you're also putting out phosphorus and potassium with that. And again, if that soil doesn't need it, why are we doing it? So really the only thing that is necessary to keep your lawn healthy is nitrogen. That's it. Unless your soil test tells you differently. And sometimes it will. But this is the only thing that year in and year out you really need to be applying. And so you can get it in a lot of different forms. Most of the time we just buy urea because it's cheap and it works well. It's got a 46% nitrogen in it. And so if you take 1 divided by 46, we've got 2.17. So 2 pounds of this product to give us 1 pound of actual nitrogen. So you're not using near as much as you would a lower product. Ammonium nitrate is great fertilizer, but good luck buying it these days. It's harder to buy ammonium nitrate than it is to buy a gun, which is ridiculous. Don't get me started. Blended fertilizers are fine, like I said, but if you don't need them, if your soil test doesn't call for them, don't buy them. A couple other rules of thumb: iron is not typically necessary. Our limestone-based soils are usually fairly adequate in iron, and our pH is pretty adequate typically for where grasses need to be, and so we don't need to lime our soils here. Limestone is obviously lime, and so it raises the pH on its own. Let me skip over this. Nitrogen timing is a really important thing. Like I said, nitrogen is critical. We have to have that to keep a good-looking lawn. But it's really important when we put nitrogen out. So one of the things that drives me nuts, I drive around Lexington and I see on signs, now is the time to fertilize your lawn. Well, no, now is not the time to fertilize your lawn. Fall is the time to fertilize your lawn. If you didn't fertilize in the fall, it's okay to put a little bit of fertilizer out in the spring, but you don't want to get it into late spring and early summer because then we deal with diseases. And then we're fertilizing all of these plants that are listed here, crabgrass, Dallas grass, on and on and on. Those are germinating and growing in the late spring and early summer, and they will absolutely love you for fertilizing at that time of the year. They're going to thrive even harder with extra nitrogen. So nitrogen in the fall. If you've got really good soils, you know for a fact that the soils have been there for a long time, they didn't remove the topsoils, you don't need to put out as much as somebody with poor soils. If you're not irrigating, less nitrogen. Irrigation pushes nitrogen through the soil, you lose it, it leaches. And so if you're not irrigating, we don't need to put out as much. If there's no traffic, you don't need recovery, and so you don't put out as much nitrogen. And then if it's a situation like a church lawn or an apartment complex, it doesn't have to be quite as pretty as a home lawn. Less nitrogen is good enough. So our advantages of fall nitrogen are cool season lawns, better color in the wintertime. I can drive down the street in the wintertime and tell who put out fall nitrogen based on the color. Less spring mowing, that's a big one to me. Less weeds in the summertime. Less heat stress in the summertime. Less water needed, in the summer, and then less disease. So a whole bunch of reasons to put your fertilizer on in the fall and not in the spring and the summertime. All right, this is the last thing I want to talk about with fertilizer. All right, so for most lawns, this is where we want to shoot. 2 pounds of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year. And we'll put those out, maybe an application in September, maybe an application in November, something like that. But for the vast majority of lawns, this is plenty. If we get into 3 and 4 pounds every fall, we're talking about very high maintenance lawns, lots of mowing, lots of irrigation, very lush plants that could have disease issues. And so when I say 4 pounds, that's going to be like the governor's mansion. It has to be glowing green for whatever reason. That's the kind of formal lawns that would get that much fertilizer. Everybody else, if we want, it's going to be still good and green, looks good, no big deal. 2 pounds of actual nitrogen will do it. Warm season grass is not a big deal. We don't really have to deal with that, but they'll go over the summertime when those plants are growing. Organic fertilizers, we'll spend just a second on this before moving on. But organic fertilizers, Sarah mentioned the YouTube videos I've got up. I've got one entirely on organic fertilizers. So if you're into these things, watch that YouTube clip, and it'll tell you everything you ever wanted to know and probably more about organic fertilizers. That's what the vast majority of them are. I'm sort of mixed. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but most of them are some kind of animal byproduct, even including humans. But we won't get into those. Like I said, watch that video if you care about that. Irrigation, really quickly on irrigation. This is our goal for irrigation. Our goal is to keep our soil at an average of field capacity. And so on the left here, we've all these vertical lines here, or what are the horizontal lines? These lines are water. These are soil particles. And so this soil over here is totally full of water. This soil in the middle has air spaces and has water. Remember, that's exactly what we want to have, half and half of soil and, with air and water. And this soil over here, most of the water is gone. We're in a tough spot for the plants. We're at a wilting point over here. So saturation, oops, stupid Windows 8. Not sure how to get rid of that. All right. Saturation, not good because no air spaces. Roots can't grow. This one, our field capacity situation, all this is the excess water is drained away. We've got both. That's our field capacity. That's the average that we want to see. So how we're going to get that is when we irrigate, we're going to fill up the soil completely, just like this, till it's saturated. Basically, when you see water starting to stand on the surface, that's what we want to see. Let it just drain out, let it evaporate, let the plants use it until the point where it's starting to, the plants will see you'll see a little wilt. Wilting, if you walk across your lawn, instead of springing back up, it just stays laid over and you'll see your footprints in that lawn. And so wilting is okay, a little bit of wilt is okay. But once we get to this point, we recharge completely, saturate that soil, and we just go through the whole process again. And that is what we call deep and infrequent irrigation. And that's going to give us a situation like this on the left, really good root system, plants sending down deeper roots to find more water when it hits that wilting point. But there's plenty of moisture in the soil because we keep recharging it. There's a whole bunch of different scenarios that we can get into here. Too much moisture all the time, not enough moisture, just light watering. As you can see, the plants are not ideal in those situations. And if we get into severe drought where they say no watering their lawns, we have a situation like this with no root system, plants are going to be in trouble. I don't recommend watering for most lawns unless for whatever reason you feel that you have to have a dark green lawn all summer long. If there's ever concern if the drought is going to be long enough that you're going to lose grass, I think it's important to irrigate. But if you're not in that situation where drought is only a week or so, no big deal. But if it progresses longer than a week and a half or so, it's probably important to get back out there and get some water to it. Best time of the day to irrigate, first thing in the morning. Probably 4, 5, 6 a.m. is ideal. Once you get in that 7 o'clock hour, everybody's flushing their toilets, turning their showers on, your water pressure is decreased, and you don't have great efficiency. But first thing in the morning is way better than at night because wet leaves, the longer they stay wet, the more chance you're going to get disease. And so we want to see dry leaves as long as possible, and then the dew that forms in the morning, that has high disease potential as well with it. And so we want to wash that off with our irrigation water. All right, quickly on pests. I think I've got about 12 minutes here. So, it doesn't matter what kind of pests we're dealing with here, but regardless of the kind of pests, whether it's insects, weeds, or diseases, any of them is going to reduce our turf quality. It's going to make the grass look bad. And so, whether we're talking insects or diseases or weeds, we need to know when they start to grow, when they show up, all that stuff, because that's when it's easiest to deal with them. When we're talking specifically weeds, well, I got some disease stuff in here too, but ways to deal with weeds and diseases, I guess. You can do all of these different things: hand removal, proper irrigation, proper mowing heights, all these things that we've talked about so far, proper fertility. If we're talking about insects, certainly some host removal for Japanese beetle adults, taking roses out of your yard, or not planting Japanese maples. Those attract adult females. But the last thing I've got listed on here is pesticides, and that's by design. We should be doing all of these different things before we ever have to deal with pesticides. So your best control against any of this stuff is the thicker and healthier your turf is, the less chance you're going to have issues with pests and removal. All right, disease triangle. I don't know if anybody has shown you this or not, but this just has 3 legs here: the host, the environment, and the pathogen. And to get disease on grass, we'll get the clover. To get disease on grass, it's important here. All of these things have to happen. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. So the environment has to be right. Usually it's hot and muggy, so summertime, usually in 90 daytime temperature, 70 at night is usually what causes diseases on cool season grasses. But the pathogen has to be present. If the pathogen's not there, we don't get diseases. And if the host is not stressed out for whatever reason, whether we mowed it improperly, if we didn't irrigate it properly, whatever, if the host is not there, then we don't get disease. And it's the same thing with weeds and bugs. If we don't have a host that's got stress issues, we're not going to see a whole lot of damage from diseases or insects. All right, weeds really quickly. All they are is plant out of place. Something growing where you don't want it to grow, and it's a weed. And so a lot of times you get situations like this: clumps of tall fescue in Kentucky bluegrass. That's a weed. We don't want to see that. All right. You don't know your weeds. We'll fly through these. How's that sound? Really quickly on nimblewheel. Nimblewheel is one that kind of drives people nuts, and a lot of people don't know the difference between it and Bermuda grass. But you can, with some of the characteristics that I told you about, looking at ligules, looking at vernation, whether it's rolled or folded, you can tell pretty easily the difference between nimblewheel and Bermuda grass. And there is a product out there now called Tenacity that does a great job, just absolutely will smoke nimblewheel. Turns it bleach white, and you'll see it show up in the lawn and then kills it off. Yellow nutsedge, basically control that one with fixing your drainage. It likes wet areas, but there's a product called Sedge Hammer that does a pretty good job on nutsedge. All sorts of weeds that we see in our broadleaf plants in the fall and winter. Basically, it comes down to pretty easy control mechanisms. With the exception of maybe wild owl. All right. There's your clover. I've got it listed as a weed. Does that work for you all? Enough said? All right, we're done with Moving on to how to kill clover. No, I kid. So for annual weeds, things like crabgrass and goosegrass, the one time you'll ever see me recommend herbicides is with those weeds, crabgrass and goosegrass. And the products that I will recommend are pre-emerge herbicides that you put down in the spring by tax day typically. And so the three products that I like to see are either dithiopyr, which is dimension, prodiamine, which is barricade, or pendimethalin, which is pre-em. Any of those three as your pre-emerge does a great job on crabgrass or goosegrass put out in the spring. And if you put a repeat application about a month or so after that first one, you can have summer-long control. You won't have to deal with crabgrass or goosegrass all summer. So for annual weeds, pre is the key. Keep that in mind. For our broadleaf plants, basically we're looking at a mixture of 2,4-D, dicamba, and MCPP. So those three chemicals mixed into one jug. That's what's going to do the vast majority of our broadleaf plants. Dandelions, plantains, on and on and on. Those are the ones that we want to see. The key is they need to be growing. If it's too hot, if it's too dry, if it's too cold, and you spray one of these three-way products, you're not going to kill it. The other thing is the smaller these weeds are, the easier they are to kill, and the less chemical you're going to have to use, which again is good for the environment and good for your water. Don't spray when it's windy. That should be a no-brainer. And then if you hate violets, which I don't know why you would hate violets because they're about the prettiest plant there ever was, triclopyr does a pretty decent job on violets. And there's a whole bunch of products you can buy at different stores that have triclopyr in it. All right, so pre's for annual grasses, 2,4-D dicamba and MCPP for broadleaf weeds. Insects, I'll give you a cultural thing for white grubs. Adult females like wet soils, moist soils to lay eggs in. And so the ideal time to not be irrigating your yard is right about here when the female is coming into, right here, June, when the female is looking to start laying eggs. They're going to look for wet soils, lush grasses that have been over-fertilized and over-watered and lay eggs in those yards. And so those yards will have worse grub problems than drier and less fertilized yards. And so that's a pretty easy thing that you can do. And then, like I said, taking out roses, taking out Japanese maple, things like that will help as well. Moles, this is one of those things that drives people absolutely nuts. I've got the 30 best ways to control moles there in order of effectiveness is, you've all seen that whack-a-mole game. That is the best way to control moles. Stand with a pitchfork, and when that mole pops his head up, you stab that pitchfork through the mole. Sounds a little gruesome, I understand, but it's effective. So typically right after lunch, these things are active, and so you can see them. You can see the little mole runs moving, and if you stand around with a pitchfork, you can nail them. If it comes out with some, sorry for the maybe the graphic here, but a little bit of blood on your pitchfork tines, you know you got it. Sorry, but it's very effective. This tomcat mole killer is a little big-looking worm that the mole comes up on and eats. You have to put these down in the mole run itself, and then the mole will stumble on them and eat it. Works really well. There is a little bit of concern that other animals could get those, but if you have them buried properly in the ground, should be no big deal. And then traps work okay sometimes. Sometimes they don't. They're just not very effective to me. All right. Here's your sustainable stuff, Sarah. So you're seeing more and more and more of this. This is going to get me out of a job here. That's why I'm jumping onto the sustainable bandwagon. Lawns are for losers. I know that some municipalities are going to things like, have smaller lawns or get rid of your grass altogether and plant a ground cover. Why have something that you have to mow and use fossil fuels on? I can't argue with that. If you don't have a reason to have a lawn, why do we have a lawn? For me, I've got kids. I want and dogs. I've got a reason to have a lawn. Another reason why I wouldn't want a whole bunch of ground cover growing all the way up to my house is that it's a really good cover for rodents. And I don't want rodents growing or living around my house because rodents are going to attract what? Snakes. And I certainly don't want snakes living around my house. And so that's one of my reasons for wanting shorter cut plants around. All right, so really quickly here, I've got just a couple of minutes. For lower input, sustainable type lawns, the healthier your soil is, the better your soil. Again, better topsoil, dark color, lots of organic material in it, the better your lawn is going to be. And again, that's why I cuss out these contractors that remove the topsoil, because it's a really tough situation to grow turf plants in. The right grass, the less input grass is tall fescue. That's the one we want to see rather than Kentucky bluegrass. We have to do a lot more work with Kentucky bluegrass. Taller mowing, like I said, putting that mowing up to 3.5 inches in the summertime is going to mean less irrigation, less nutrients, less mowing. Fertilizer when necessary based on your soil test. Only put out those 2 pounds of actual nitrogen per year. If you can stand dealing with the brown grass in the summertime, let it go dormant. Who cares? Unless there's some sort of HOA covenant that makes you have a pretty lawn all the time. Treating weeds, like I said, put a pre-emerge herbicide out in the spring. That's a good thing to do. All these organic and natural products that you see on the store shelves, the vast majority of them don't do anything. Don't waste your money on them. You'll most of the time hurt your grass before you'll hurt the weeds. And then, like I said, the alternatives, ground covers, different things that you can have instead of having a big lawn area that you have to mow. All right, to me, this doesn't look bad. What about y'all?
I like it. Yeah, in my lawn, in my yard. It looks pretty there.
I think I've got some people that think the same way that I do, but to me, a little bit of color in the yard, I have no problems with that at all. And so getting rid of violets, I don't understand. To me, that's just, it's pretty. It doesn't detract from the lawn whatsoever. Who says a lawn just has to be green and one thing? Who came up with that? To me, it's silly. What about this? Is this acceptable for the lawn?
Yes.
Very pretty.
Bees.
Okay. Somebody said bees. So,
Yeah.
if you've got kids or if you've got a lot of pets, bees might be a concern there. I can understand that completely. And certainly if we're talking a soccer field, a youth soccer field, we probably wouldn't want to see all these flowers because there'd be bees and potential bee stings and all of that stuff like crazy. So probably not something that we want to have if there's a bunch of activity on the lawn. But for the most part, there's nothing wrong with that. All grass seed up until the 1950s and 60s had clover seed in it. That's how lawns were. You didn't fertilize them. You let the clover fertilize your lawn for free. If you've got a good stand of clover just like this, it'll produce, taken out of the nitrogen out of the atmosphere, 2 pounds of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year. Does that number sound familiar? That's what I recommend. And so if you've got a good clover stand, you don't ever have to put a lick of fertilizer out on that lawn. So to me, that's a no-brainer. It makes total sense. Some people hate those flowers, though. And like I said, if you got kids and stuff, it's not a great option. But this is something new that's out there. This thing is called microclover. You can hardly see it, right? It's a tiny, tiny little plant. It's a small plant. We're doing research with this at our research station, and it's exciting. We don't know exactly how well it's going to work for us, whether it's going to stay as small as it is in this picture or not. But certainly we're getting the same benefits that we would with a regular old white clover. We're getting the free fertilizer. As a matter of fact, this stuff has been used in Europe for several years now, this microclover, and the vast majority of soccer fields going in Europe today are going in with microclover because of this reason. The part on the left there has a microclover, part on the right, no microclover, not a bit of fertilizer has been put on this field. Which part looks healthier? Sure, the part with the microclover. There's all sorts of nitrogen feeding that grass. And so free fertilizer by putting this stuff into your lawn. And so to me, it's not about monocultures, monostands. It's about what can we do to lessen our impact on the environment And certainly having a few broadleaf plants that are doing good things for our soil is stomachable, even though the uniformity may not be perfect. It's so much better for the environment than putting out all that fertilizer and things like that. All right, that's I'm 3 minutes over here. Sorry about that. But if you're a Facebooker or a Twitterer or whatever, check us out. This is the first place that I'll put information out is on Facebook, and it sends directly to Twitter. So check those things out. And then Sarah said she showed you the UK Turf webpage. There's great publications on there from my predecessor, Dr. A.J. Powell, and great information for homeowners on there on anything that you can imagine. And so check that out. And if you check the UK Ag Extension publication page and search my name, you'll find some brand new publications from me. So with that, anybody have any questions? I've got about 5 or so minutes. I can stick around if anybody has any questions.
Recycling or redoing your lawn and everything else, trying to kill off the weeds that are there, because my lawn's mainly 90 weeds right now. I've been looking at the idea of this summer putting down plastic over the areas that I want to kill off. And I've seen some things that I've read that say go with clear plastic. Wet down your area and put down clear plastic over it. Then I've seen others that say black plastic. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So your plan is to kill off everything that's there by putting plastic over the surface. Is that correct?
Correct.
So black plastic is the way to go because you want to block out sunlight. That's critical. Most plants, other than things like Bermuda grass, something like Roundup is going to do a pretty stinking good job, and you don't have to mess with black plastic. But if you have stuff picking from weeds like Bermuda, then you've got to do a little bit more on them. And so black is way better than clear. Instead of covering with straw, could we put out a little bit of soil instead? It's better than nothing, but again, we don't want too much soil covering up the seed. It doesn't do as good of a job as the straw because it doesn't hold the moisture in place as well as the straw does. Recommended time for planting clover. We planted it for our studies in Lexington. We planted it in April, we planted it in July, and we planted it in October and had good success.
Anything else? Thanks, Greg. We do appreciate it.
Sure. Everybody have a good night.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Enjoy your hockey game.
Thank you.
Tracy, too. She likes hockey, too. Right, correct. Right. Don't forget Gardenaganza, I think, is in 2 weeks.
Saturday.
Yeah, the 28th, whatever. Is that this week already? Time flies. For the Master Gardeners, they do, this is one of, actually the biggest fundraiser that they do.
A lot of native plants available to buy.
Yeah. You can take as many, if you want to take a few extra and pass them out. We'll see you all next Tuesday.
Like everything's going on this Saturday.
Sure, could you show me where on the website?